Chapter 1254. After the bolt from the blue, there was an indescribable silence. Behind daybreak and dawn, at the forefront of the crowd, the beautiful phoenix suddenly shook her body. She seemed to be in disbelief and raised her head. She stared blankly at Li Tianlan standing in the air. Everyone's expression was dead silent. Li Guangtu, who had been able to suppress the Wang family of Beihai many years ago. Li Guangtu, whose scheming and personal strength had caused uneasiness in the entire Zhongzhou state. Li Guangtu, who made everyone believe that he would lead the Li family to the peak. Li Guangtu, who was teamed up by Kunlun City, the Wang family of Beihai, and even united with foreign forces and labeled as a traitor. Li Guangtu, who grew up in the Li family, fought side by side with them, went crazy, laughed, and quarreled with them. Li Guangtu, who cooperated with Gu Xingyun. Was he dead? Indescribable complex emotions swept through everyone's heart like a tsunami. One after another, streaks of blood spread in Daybreak's eyes at a speed visible to the naked eye. His eyes instantly turned red. Li Tianlan looked at him silently with a calm expression. No sadness or joy. I don't believe it. Daybreak gritted his teeth, stared at Li Tianlan, and growled word by word. The commotion in the crowd finally began to spread. People regained their ability to think, and the noise and uproar spread wildly. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said calmly, "The body is still on the way and will be sent here later. How about the funeral? You can do whatever you want. I don't believe you dare to kill him." Daybreak met Li Tianlan's gaze and did not give in at all. There was only madness left in his eyes. It's just a sword strike. Why don't I dare to kill him? Why can't I kill him? Li Tianlan said lightly. His voice was flat without any ups and downs, with supercilious casualness, carelessness, and naturalness. Daybreak stood where he was, and his aura kept surging. It was difficult for most people to understand the relationship between Daybreak and Li Guangtu. He and Dawn were brothers, but they were not brothers. They were two little beggars picked up by Li Guangtu from outside. Their life views, martial arts strength, character, and attitude were all formed by following Li Guangtu. They certainly had a strong sense of belonging to the Li family, but this sense of belonging was not as important as Li Guangtu himself in their hearts. In their hearts, Li Guangtu was like a father, a teacher, and a big brother. During the heyday of the Li family, the two little beggars picked up by Li Guangtu were trained as sacred guards of Li Guangtu. In the war of treason at the border, the two of them followed a large number of elites of the Li family to face the first wave of attacks from various superpowers. After being seriously injured, they barely broke through and planned to join Li Guangtu, but Li Guangtu had already moved the battlefield with several invincible realm experts. They were lucky to survive, lurked in East Island after the border war, and became the first two cornerstones of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Then they continued to follow Li Guangtu and built the current purgatory of Heaven Capital. 42 years old this year. Except for the first few years when Li Guangtu didn't bring them back to the Li family, he and Daybreak had been with Li Guangtu all their lives and had never left. Li Guangtu was at the forefront of the battle. Li Guangtu was at the back to develop his forces. Whether he showed up or not, Daybreak and Li Ming knew that Li Guangtu was still there. As long as he was there, the two little beggars he picked up dared to face all challenges. Time went by year after year. The image of Li Guangtu kept changing in their hearts, from father and brother to teacher, and gradually became the pillar of their hearts, heaven and earth, the world, and their faith. They were the top generals of the Li family. But first of all, they were still Li Guangtu's confidants for most of their lives. On that rainy day in Yuzhou that year, the two hungry little beggars took shelter from the rain under the eaves of an exquisite restaurant. They looked enviously and longingly at the food in front of the restaurant's customers, swallowing saliva and shivering. Li Guangtu was still the same Li Guangtu. He was the chosen one of the Li family, the hope of the rise of the Li family, the gloomy and vicious young master of the Li family, the first commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, the invincible realm expert of the Li family, the traitor, the god of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, and the loser who was defeated by Li Tianlan and even had to cooperate with Gu Xingyun. What did it matter? In their hearts, Li Kuangtu was still the big brother who walked out of the restaurant on that rainy day, touched their heads, smiled, and said that he would take them to eat delicious food. That year, Li Kuangtu was 19 years old. They were only 6 or 7 years old. That year, the handsome Li Kuangtu was having dinner with his classmates in that restaurant. The two little beggars changed into clean clothes, followed him from the restaurant to the bar, and then to the hotel. When Li Kuangtu walked into the hotel room with the two little girls who could be regarded as campus belles in his school, the young master of the Li family said to them with a smile, "You'll follow me from now on." Many years later, Daybreak and Dawn knew that when they first met, Li Kuangtu was compassionate. Kuangtu did have a compassionate heart, but if it weren't for the poor and kind-hearted young lady that day, Li Kuangtu wouldn't have done that. The two little beggars became props that day. It was because of Li Kuangtu's kindness to them that the beautiful young lady willingly took off her clothes in front of Li Kuangtu with another female classmate in the hotel that night. But what did it matter? They might be props, but they were not abandoned in the end. After that night, they were taken by Li Kuangtu to the Li family's unbelievably luxurious mansion in Yuzhou. They had new identities, new rooms, and new books. Li Kuangtu said that they were his younger brothers. Everyone in the Li family was extremely friendly to them. No one dared to look down on them at school, because they had a brother who often drove a luxury car with all kinds of beautiful girls to and from school. They were no longer props, as if they had really become Li Kuangtu's younger brothers. Later on, they were all masks. At that time, Li Kuangtu was the real Li Kuangtu. He was merciless in training, merciless, charming, surrounded by all kinds of beautiful girls, and had a lot of money in his pocket. He would buy a lot of snacks for them. He would laugh when he took them to eat spicy hot pot. He would be at a loss when he cried. He would be merciless in training. He would take all the responsibility when he got into trouble and yell at others. He would let Daybreak and Dawn step on his shoulders to watch a strange big sister take a bath. He would play glass ball with them for an afternoon without any impatience. He would play video games with them until late at night and then drive out for skewers. He would force them to get drunk and lift the skirt of the girl at the next table. Things changed. Different people had different Li Kuangtu in their hearts. He might feel sorry for everyone, but he really didn't feel sorry for the two little beggars. And now, Li Kuangtu was dead? The world seemed to have ushered in the end. The pillar of faith had completely collapsed. It was just a sword. Why wouldn't he dare? His words were simple, and his tone was calm. There seemed to be a slight sound in the dark. "I killed him. Li Kuangtu is dead. The body is still on the way. It will be sent here later. How about the funeral? You can do whatever you want." It was just a sword. Why wouldn't I dare to kill him? Why couldn't I kill him? The clear and distant voice kept echoing in Daybreak's ears. At first, it was broken notes, but as the notes kept combining, Daybreak finally understood what those words meant. His reason was broken little by little in the subtle sound. His soul was twisted and completely collapsed in an irreversible trend. "No!" A shrill voice sounded from behind. Phoenix, who was staggering, suddenly screamed and a mouthful of blood sprayed directly from his mouth. Daybreak suddenly looked up. His eyes were already blood red. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Without any hesitation or thinking, the sharp and twisted sword light gathered in an instant. Daybreak's figure suddenly rose into the sky, like a meteor. "I'll kill you." At the same time as the ferocious roar sounded, the soft sword that had been with him for decades had been pulled out. The swaying blade tightened for a second and then completely collapsed. The shining sword light spread wildly in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Blood bloomed in the air. He no longer had any concerns or thoughts. Daybreak, who was completely mad, directly burned his vitality at this moment. The sharp sword energy was condensed to the extreme and turned into a giant sword shadow of hundreds of meters. The shadow of the giant sword completely enveloped Li Tianlan. As Daybreak's body rose into the air, the shadow was constantly shrinking. The sword energy was still condensing. The giant sword shadow, which crossed from top to bottom, shrank into countless sword energy long swords. Sharp, gloomy, and pure. Daybreak's eyes were full of madness. Before this sword hurt anyone, he had been seriously injured because of his reckless outburst. The sword shadow and daybreak rushed over at the same time. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. He raised his palm and pressed it down. It was calm, casual, and light as if it had no power. However, everyone could hear the oppressive and violent sound that suddenly rang out in the air. The sky above the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was abruptly twisted for a moment. In the thunderous sonic boom, all the sword energy disappeared in an instant. The whole space was shaking violently. The twisted air was shaking wildly in a way visible to the naked eye, and ripple-like ripples appeared in the air. Daybreak's rising body seemed to be hit by a huge force and was directly slapped down at a faster and fiercer speed. Boom! The ground shook violently. The asphalt pavement in front of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital suddenly cracked. Dust flew, and the dense cracks spread in all directions on the ground, all the way to the front of the crowd. Daybreak's whole body was slapped into the ground, covered in blood. He coughed violently. Li Tianlan. Dawn's attack and roar followed Daybreak. The weapon in his hand was also a soft sword. The soft blade trembled slightly, and blue electric arcs lit up one after another. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He stood in the air and didn't even move. The sword energy around him directly pressed down. There was another pit beside Daybreak. The ground made a slight sound in the process of cracking. The two brothers, Daybreak and Daybreak, were lying side by side. In the blink of an eye, the two strongest experts of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were both seriously injured. Li Tianlan landed on the ground. Wu Qing stayed in Emperor Dong's palace. Naturally, he didn't wear the black windbreaker that could be worn even in summer. Dressed in beige casual clothes, he clapped his hands casually, without any dust on his body. He did it casually, as if it were nothing. The entire Purgatory of Heaven capital was dead silent. If the almost extravagant supply of materials in the past 2 months made some people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital understand something, and made others have other ideas, then Li Tianlan's casual action was enough to make them really realize what the number one on the divine list of this era was. Li Tianlan's eyes quickly scanned the crowd. There were many people in the crowd that he was familiar with. Some people he knew. Some people he only had some impressions of. Similarly, there were many people he had never seen before. The elites of the Li family formed the main body of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But the Purgatory of Heaven capital was also developing, so there would naturally be new blood joining. These people didn't have the entanglement in the hearts of the old people of the Li family. Their loyalty was only to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, not to the Li family. When Daybreak and Dawn were slapped down from the air, some of these people subconsciously took a step forward. Among them were some veterans of the Li family, and more of them were new blood who joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital later. Some people's eyes flickered, and they stood still. No one knew what they were thinking. The people who were most familiar with Li Tianlan all had complicated expressions. They wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. This was a different attitude. To some extent, this also represented the different positions within the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Tianlan suddenly smiled and took 2 steps forward. He looked at a middle-aged man standing in front of the crowd and whispered, "Uncle, long time no see." This was an old man who looked a little weathered, a little weak, and a little old, but still handsome. He stood quietly in the first row of the crowd, surrounded by a dozen middle-aged men and women. Obviously, in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, this was a man whose status was not too high, but he had considerable influence in the Li family. When Li Tianlan was looking at him, he was also looking at Li Tianlan. Different emotions were surging in his deep eyes. There was relief, nostalgia, trance, anger, helplessness, joy, confusion, and bitterness. Li Huazhang, Li Guangtu's cousin. This was a real member of the Li family. Even in the most glorious time of the Li family, he was one of the core members of the Li family who was valued by Li Honghe. If Li Tianlan had to rank all the people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, excluding Li Guangtu, Li Huazhang's importance was definitely in the top 3. Li Huazhang's strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could not be said to be a top expert, but he was the talent that Emperor Dong's palace currently lacked the most. Tianlan, what do you want to do here? Looking at his nephew, whom he had not seen for more than a decade, Li Huazhang moved the corner of his mouth and asked in a hoarse voice. His tone was a little difficult and he was in a trance. The year he left the Li family's camp, Li Tianlan was only in his early teens. At that time, like most people in the Li family, he was overwhelmed by the cruel reality. He was not close to Li Tianlan, nor was he estranged. In that oppressive environment at that time, it was really difficult for anyone to calm down and get along with a child carefreely. Li Huazhang only remembered that when Li Tianlan was a child, he liked to stick to him and ask him to tell stories. At that time, Li Tianlan was even younger, about 5 or 6 years old. 2 years before he left the Li family's camp, Li Tianlan had begun to seriously accept Li Honghe's almost cruel training plan and worked hard to change the Li family's fate. They didn't even have the chance to meet at that time. In any case, Li Huazhang did not expect that the first meeting between uncle and nephew after leaving the Li family's camp would be like this. He killed Li Guangtu? Li Guangtu was dead? Li Huazhang looked at him in a daze, and his eyes were a little dull. I came to see you, Li Tianlan said slowly. His eyes narrowed slightly. I also came to see the child. Child? Li Huazhang was stunned. The crowd was silent for a moment, and everyone's expressions suddenly changed. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth and turned to look at Phoenix, who was standing there in a daze. His voice was soft. Where is the child? You and Li Guangtu's child. Chapter 1255. That child. In the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, uneasiness, hesitation, struggle, and different emotions permeated the crowd. Everything that happened today was too sudden. Everyone in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was not mentally prepared. They all thought that the problem between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace was only between Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu. Both of them were from the Li family. Even if there was a difference in strength, they should not be in such a hurry to kill each other. Li Tianlan's youth became his greatest advantage against the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He still had too much time to put the already divided Li family back together and make the Li family better, so people thought that he would not use too drastic means. Li Tianlan's sword qi blocked the Purgatory of Heaven capital but did not kill anyone. The subsequent supply of materials confirmed this point. They thought that Li Tianlan would be gentle to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, slowly draw it to his side, and try to incorporate the Purgatory of Heaven capital into Emperor Dong's palace. But today, when no one was mentally prepared, Li Tianlan came to the Purgatory of Heaven capital again. Conciliatory? Roping him in? Convince? Nothing at all. He directly announced the death of Li Guangtu, which instantly hurt Daybreak and Dawn. He didn't have much contact with the old people of the Li family and directly asked about the child of Li Guangtu and Phoenix. Li Guangtu had descendants. This was no longer a secret. This child was undoubtedly very special in the hearts of the old people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Those loyal to Li Guangtu would regard this child as the young master of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Those who came from the Li family and stood on Li Guangtu's side regarded this child as the future young master of the Li family. For those old people who were in Purgatory of Heaven capital but had their hearts in Li Tianlan, they had mixed feelings about this child. Now hearing the news of Li Guangtu's death and seeing Li Tianlan come directly to ask about the child, almost everyone thought of a word. Cut the weeds and pull up the roots. Many people could no longer remain silent. Li Huazhang was the first to speak. He said in a deep voice, Tianlan, Huawu is Guangtu's flesh and blood. For Li Huazhang, it was another matter whether he recognized the child as the young master or not. But no matter what, the child was indeed the blood of the Li family. This identity alone was worthy of his protection. Li Tianlan was speechless for a while and asked, What's the child's name? Well, Li Huazhang, Li Huacheng, Li Huao, this name. Is there really no one who would call it wrong? Regardless of whether someone yelled out the wrong number or not, someone would definitely call the wrong number, right? Right? He takes after his mother. Li Huazhang said in a low voice, Jiang Huawu. Li Tianlan glanced at Phoenix. For the first time, he learned Phoenix's surname. He nodded and said softly, "Where is he?" Li Huazhang raised his head and looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. He said calmly, "This is the bloodline of the Li family. Tianlan, are you really going to? I'm just looking." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Uncle, do you think I shouldn't see it?" "Your Highness, may I know in what capacity does your Majesty have come to see young master?" A chubby middle-aged man stepped forward and smiled amiably, but his eyes were sharp. "Are you Emperor Dong Huang of Emperor Dong's palace? Or a member of the Li family?" Li Tianlan was silent for a second and said faintly, "I don't understand. Who can translate it for me?" Beside the fat man, a woman who looked to be in her early 30s came out and said softly, "If your Majesty comes to visit young master as a member of the Li family, we naturally welcome you. But if you come as Emperor Dong Huang, you are the enemy of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Although the Purgatory of Heaven Capital is not strong, before we fall, we will certainly have the courage to stand in front of your Majesty. Your Majesty, why don't you have a try?" "Got it," Li Tianlan said with a smile. "Are you forcing me to take a stand? Young master? What young master?" "Of course, it's the young master of the Li family," the fat man said with a smile, his voice clear and firm. Li Tianlan looked at the fat man quietly. Everyone's eyes were also focused on the fat man. There were always some people whose loyalty was not as strong as Daybreak's performance, but they were equally fearless. "I am the patriarch of the Li family, and I have never appointed a young master. Explain, how did this so-called young master of the Li family come about?" Li Tianlan looked at the fat man's eyes aggressively. The fat man's face changed, and he said in a deep voice, "His Highness Li Kuangtu is the only son of Senior Li, and Huawu is the legitimate son of His Highness. Naturally, he is the only heir of the Li family. Your Majesty, am I wrong?" Li Tianlan looked at him quietly, and his voice did not fluctuate at all. "Li Kuangtu is indeed Grandpa's son. But when Grandpa died, he was not the designated heir." "Of course I know." The fat man's voice sounded very respectful. "His Highness has never been greedy for the position of patriarch of the Li family. What he wants to control is the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Before Senior Li died, your Majesty did temporarily take charge of the Li family, but the Li family belongs to the Li family. Huawu is now the last lineal descendant of the Li family. If the Li family is not handed over to him, who else can it be handed over to? If Senior Li knew Huawu's birth, he would definitely make the same choice. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Donghuang's palace, how can the people of the Li family be convinced if they don't hand over such a big foundation to Huawu? If they don't hand over such a big foundation to Huawu, will they always let outsiders take charge?" Everyone looked at the fat man in shock. Li Huazhang's face changed. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, but he did not know what to say. Li Tianlan seemed to be angry and laughed. "So you mean that this child named Huawu will not only inherit the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future, but I will also hand over Emperor Donghuang's palace to him, right? Is that what you mean?" "That's not what I mean," the fat man said softly. "It's that the Li family really needs a reasonable and legal heir, and Huawu is now the only candidate. I believe that Senior Li's spirit in heaven will also agree to let Huawu take charge of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Donghuang's palace. Your Majesty's contribution to the Li family is undeniable, and we are also grateful for your contribution to the Li family. We also hope that your Majesty can make persistent efforts and train Huawu well in the future, so that he can completely take over Emperor Donghuang's palace and Purgatory of Heaven Capital." Well, this was not only asking him to hand over all his current family property, but also to do his best to train the person who robbed him of his family property. Li Tianlan suddenly did not know what to say. Glib talk had never been his strength. Ridiculous! In the gloomy low roar, Li Huazhang, who had been silent, could not bear it anymore and stood up. "Zuoqing, if you don't know the situation of the Li family, don't talk casually. Emperor Donghuang's palace is the foundation of his integration of various resources. Why should Huawu take over? The situation he created can't be taken away with a few words. Moreover, why do you say that Huawu will take over Emperor Donghuang's palace? Tianlan is the heir of the Li family appointed by Senior Li on his deathbed, not the temporary control of the Li family. Emperor Donghuang's palace, the Li family, and the purgatory of heaven capital should be his. Even if the Li family has a young master, it should be Tianlan's confirmed candidate. Li Huazhang stared coldly at the fat man who was called Zuoqing, and his voice became colder. Moreover, Zuoqing, you are just a guest of purgatory of heaven capital. You are not a guest of the Li family. When is it your turn to intervene in our affairs? Chapter 1256. Li Tianlan glanced at Li Huazhang in surprise. Because he left early, he had no deep impression of this uncle, so he couldn't judge his position. But at this time his attitude was very clear. Obviously, he chose to stand on his side. Li Tianlan looked at the crowd around Li Huazhang again. A dozen people were not a large-scale group in the purgatory of heaven capital, but Li Tianlan was very familiar with a few of them. Seeing Li Tianlan looking over, they nodded slightly and raised the corners of their mouths, revealing a smile. Advisor Li, when Senior Li died, young Master Hua was not born, so Senior Li chose to let His Majesty East Emperor temporarily control the Li family. The chubby Zhuge took a deep look at Li Huazhang. I still say the same thing. The Li family belongs to the Li family, so it should be inherited by the Li family. Now the Li family is divided into two, Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital. This is definitely not the situation that Senior Li wants to see. If he is still here, he will certainly hope that young Master Huao can slowly integrate the power of the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace and make the Li family strong again. I am a member of the Li family, Li Huazhang said coldly, but everyone knows that the Li family's power is mainly concentrated in the purgatory of heaven capital. Emperor Dong's palace is the foundation of Tianlan, and its main body is Samsara Palace. What does it have to do with the Li family? Zhuge, I can understand that you regard Huawu as the young master of the purgatory of heaven capital. But the Li family belongs to Tianlan, and Emperor Dong's palace belongs to Tianlan. We don't argue about whether Huawu is qualified to inherit the Li family. At least, he is not qualified to inherit Emperor Dong's palace. What a joke! A sharp voice rang out from the back of the crowd. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and the corners of his mouth raised in an almost imperceptible curve. Here it came. The purpose of his coming here today was to see what kind of monsters were there in the purgatory of heaven capital. The more such people came out, the better. An old man who looked nearly 60 years old walked out of the crowd and said coldly, "Is there no power of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace?" The foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was built by the Li family. Later, the Samsara Palace joined because of His Majesty Donghuang. The old man paused, looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, if I may be so bold to ask, do you now think that you no longer belong to the Li family, but only to Donghuang?" Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The old man in front of him looked the same as the left-honored guest, but he was also completely different. When the latter stepped forward, his gaze was calm. On the other hand, the eyes of the old man in front of him flickered. It was obvious that he was plotting something. "Who are you?" Li Tianlan asked directly. "Codename Tengu." The old man smiled and said, "Thank you, Your Highness Li Kuangtu. I joined the Purgatory of Heaven Capital 5 years ago and am now the Chief of Staff of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital." "So, you are not from the Li family?" Li Tianlan's voice was cold. "The Purgatory of Heaven Capital belongs to the Li family. I belong to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, so naturally, I belong to the Li family." Heavenly Hound smiled and said, "I just don't know if His Majesty Donghuang still recognizes his identity as a member of the Li family." "I naturally belong to the Li family." Li Tianlan sneered. Li Huazhang frowned slightly and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Heavenly Hound nodded and said in a gentle voice, "It's good that Your Majesty recognizes it. You are naturally a member of the Li family, but not a member of the Li family. I don't know if you recognize this." There was a commotion in the crowd. Li Tianlan frowned. Heavenly Hound seemed to be completely relaxed and said with a sneer, "I have talked about this with His Highness Li Kuangtu. Your Majesty once claimed to be Senior Li's grandson. Everyone regarded you as the young master of the Li family, so you have your current status. In other words, all of us think that His Highness Li Kuangtu is your biological father. But in fact, His Highness Li Kuangtu told me personally that you have no blood relationship with him. Senior Li only has one son, His Highness. But Your Majesty, you are not His Highness' son, so are you a member of the Li family?" The commotion in the crowd strangely calmed down. This matter was no longer a secret, especially for the purgatory of Heaven Capital. It was an open matter. Emperor Dong's palace was like the sun at high noon. But the purgatory of Heaven Capital could not hide its decline in the past 2 years. In order to stabilize his position, Li Kuangtu had already made this matter public. This was also one of the reasons why some elders of the Li family were loyal to Li Tianlan but were in a dilemma in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan did not speak. He just looked at Heavenly Hound silently and seemed to be unable to refute. Heavenly Hound's smile gradually widened, and the expression on his wrinkled old face gradually became a little playful. He believed that Li Tianlan did not dare to kill him today. If it was when he first appeared, it was still possible for Li Tianlan to suddenly make a move. But now he had named Li Tianlan's identity. He was a member of the Li family, but he was also an outsider of the Li family. Under this premise, if Li Tianlan killed him, it would only make people think that he was angry out of humiliation and even offend the public. The most important thing was that Li Kuangtu was dead now. If Li Kuangtu was alive, Heavenly Hound naturally did not dare to stand up and make irresponsible remarks. But now that Li Kuangtu was dead, Heavenly Hound stood up and became a hero who tried his best to defend Li Kuangtu's widow and child. This identity was enough to make Li Tianlan not dare to kill him. From this standpoint, once Li Tianlan killed him, he would never be able to take over the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He stood up to defend the interests of Phoenix and Li Huawu, which was to defend the interests of the Li family. At present, no matter what the specific standpoint of everyone was, there were absolutely few people who really wanted Li Tianlan to kill Li Huawu, and even Li Huazhang would not agree. It was not easy for him to reluctantly accept that Li Tianlan killed Li Kuangtu. Moreover, the two sides were enemies, and it was natural that there would be life and death. But Li Huawu was just a 2-year-old child, and he had the blood of the Li family. Now he pointed out that Li Tianlan was an outsider. How could these people tolerate Li Tianlan killing Li Huawu? As long as Li Tianlan could not touch Li Huawu and his mother, he could not touch Heavenly Hound. To some extent, he and Zuoxian were the same, but they were also completely different. Zuoxian was just a visiting professor of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This status was not low, but it could not be said to be too high. He could only be regarded as a high-level member of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He stood up to protect Li Huawu and his mother, and even dared to regard Emperor Dong's palace as a part of the Li family. He was advancing in order to retreat. He was extremely loyal to Li Kuangtu. What he did was nothing more than doing his best to protect the interests of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Naturally, he would not want Emperor Dong's palace. He just wanted to keep a small part of the core interests of the purgatory of Heaven Capital as much as possible, so that Li Huawu could have the hope of making a comeback in the future. The Heavenly Hound was the chief of staff of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was the absolute core high level of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Its power and status could be said to be in the top 5. In terms of strength, compared to Dawn, the Heavenly Hound was not inferior at all. He protected Li Huawu and his mother, which could be said to be advancing in order to retreat, but what he wanted was to protect the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. Who in the purgatory of Heaven Capital didn't know Li Tianlan's origin? Zuoxian naturally knew about it, but he didn't say anything. However, the Heavenly Hound directly pointed out this point. Just from this difference, it could already be seen that the two had completely different motives. The former was really to protect the Lord. The latter was to create a favorable situation for himself and then compete for benefits. The playful expression on the Heavenly Hound's face became more and more obvious. Today's situation was simply good for him. If he didn't seize it, he was afraid that he would be struck by lightning. As far as I know, His Majesty was just a child adopted by Senior Li. Senior Li taught His Majesty martial arts and raised His Majesty. He also sincerely hoped that His Majesty could help the Li family rise. The Heavenly Hound smiled and continued, "Everyone knows a lot of things, but there are also a lot of things that you don't know. His Highness Li Kuangtu told me a lot when he was alive. Today, I'll talk to you about Senior Li. In order to let the Li family rise again, Senior Li made 3 arrangements. The first arrangement was naturally His Majesty. He kept His Majesty by his side and taught His Majesty everything that the Li family had learned. And his second arrangement was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. He constantly arranged for the veterans of the Li family to fake their deaths to escape and join the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. That's how the present arrangement came about. What we are going to talk about now is the third arrangement. Senior Li secretly adopted a daughter and taught her all the unique skills of the Li family, including the 24 moves of sword, and has been in secret contact with her for many years. At the same time, Senior Li also passed a part of the Li family's secret skills to her. At the same time, Senior Li also secretly gave part of the Li family's property to this adopted daughter. Regarding this, in addition to Senior Li and the adopted daughter, only His Highness Li Kuangtu knew about the existence of his adopted sister. The brother and sister had a very good relationship. Although they didn't see each other much, they were like-minded, and both of them were geniuses. At that time, the adopted daughter was in charge of part of the Li family's wealth and received the Li family's martial arts. Coupled with her own outstanding talent, she entered the invincible realm smoothly. The Heavenly Hound laughed. After entering the invincible realm, the adopted daughter set up a force and also set up a fund on the surface. In the crowd, the faces of many elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had gradually changed. The clear voice of the Heavenly Hound continued to echo. Everyone should have guessed that the adopted daughter was the master of Samsara Palace. She set up the Samsara Palace and also set up the Flourishing Age Fund on the surface. In fact, today's Emperor Dong's palace originated from the Li family. The relationship between His Highness Li Kuangtu and the master of Samsara Palace is very good, which has long been proved. Don't forget that the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could appear in the Dark World smoothly and occupy East Island because the master of Samsara Palace initiated the final battle of Heaven Capital. The words of the Heavenly Hound were powerful. The strange atmosphere continued to spread inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Some people were thoughtful. Some people were stunned. Some people suddenly understood. Some people were skeptical. The smile of the Heavenly Hound became more and more relaxed. He had expected all this. Everything he said could also be justified in the absence of key evidence. For example, the master of Samsara Palace did know the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, and even her martial arts was the 24 moves of sword. Another example was the final battle of Heaven Capital. From the current situation, it seemed that the Samsara Palace was indeed helping the Purgatory of Heaven Capital to officially enter the secular world. These could all be explained. As for the truth, did it matter? Li Honghe was dead and would not deny him. Li Kuangtu was dead and would not deny him. The master of Samsara Palace was dead and would not deny him. Without these key witnesses, what could Li Tianlan use to deny him? Moreover, would the dignified Dong Huang argue with him until he was flushed with anger? How could it be possible? The number 1 on the world divine list was invincible. Such an expert would definitely disdain to argue with him. But in the current situation, it was not appropriate for him to kill him. In such a deadlock, the best choice for Li Tianlan was to leave temporarily. The Heavenly Hound took 2 steps forward, with unconcealable pride in his eyes. As long as Li Tianlan left, he would become the hero who protected Li Huawu and his mother today. As the chief of staff of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he naturally had his own forces in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan wanted to leave today. In order to save his face, he would inevitably take away a group of people who were loyal to him led by Li Huazhong. Daybreak and Dawn were seriously injured. The purgatory of Heaven Capital was in a mess. This was what the Heavenly Hound wanted most. He just waited for Li Tianlan to leave, and then he would kill Daybreak by all means. The seriously injured Dawn was nothing to worry about. Next, he would use the power of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital to promote the brother-sister relationship between the Master of Samsara Palace and Li Kuangtu, and then to promote that Li Huawu was the legitimate heir of the Li family. It was unlikely for Li Huawu to inherit Emperor Dong's palace. No matter what, Li Tianlan could not be a man without a temper. But as long as he occupied this legitimate position, the Heavenly Hound could at least guarantee that he could keep the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Now, no matter how down and out the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was, it was still the foundation of a superpower, representing power and wealth that others could not imagine. As long as he could control the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he would become one of the most powerful people in the Dark World. It would be better if he could force Emperor Dong's palace to give up part of its power. The Heavenly Hound's eyes suddenly became extremely hot. He glanced at Phoenix without anyone noticing. Phoenix seemed to have not come to her senses yet. She stood there blankly, with an unconcealable sadness and weakness on her mature and beautiful face. The Heavenly Hound's eyes swept over Phoenix's face and her graceful body curves. As long as everything went well today, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would be his, and the mistress that he secretly coveted would also be his. As long as he stabilized the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he would enter her and Li Kuangtu's bedroom as soon as possible and completely conquer the beautiful and mature mistress in their bed. The Heavenly Hound's eyes turned and fell on Li Tianlan. He said with a smile, "I don't know if your Majesty has doubts about the friendliness of the Samsara Palace. But no matter what, this is the truth. Young Master Huao can inherit everything of the Li family, including Emperor Dong's palace, because it is a part of the Li family." Li Tianlan was lost in thought. Anger? He really didn't have this kind of emotion. If Li Tianlan hadn't had access to some information about the Flourishing Age Fund, maybe he would have believed the Heavenly Hound's words. Grandpa's adopted daughter? Li Kuangtu's adopted sister? Everything about the Samsara Palace had nothing to do with Li Tianlan? The Arabian Nights was unimaginable, a bunch of nonsense. Except for military counselor, no one in the world could really understand the Flourishing Age Fund. It was an empire of wealth hidden in the dark. What was exposed to the outside was just the tip of the iceberg. And this tip of the iceberg seemed to be written with Li Tianlan's name after the Samsara Palace was merged into the East Emperor Palace. But there were more hidden wealth, the shares that were secretly purchased from the major groups, and all the secrets that others couldn't find out. Li Tianlan was the real owner. From the beginning to the end, there was no so-called transfer. From the very beginning, when the master of Samsara Palace got those interests, on those secret contracts, Li Tianlan's name was written, not the Li family's. Similarly, in many places, the master of Samsara Palace also left many traps specifically for the Li family. She obviously considered the existence of Li Kuangtu. These traps were aimed at Li Kuangtu and the power of the Li family. In the plan of the master of Samsara Palace, if Li Tianlan really failed in the battle with Li Kuangtu, even if Li Tianlan's martial arts were all destroyed as long as he was alive, he could use these traps to cause unimaginable huge trouble for the Li family when it annexed the Flourishing Age Fund. The intention behind this was self-evident. So, Li Kuangtu and the master of Samsara Palace had a deep sibling relationship? It was better to say that Gu Xingyun was Wang Tianzong's long-lost younger brother. Moreover, even if there were none of these things, when the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the East Emperor Palace existed at the same time, the Flourishing Age Fund chose Li Tianlan instead of Li Kuangtu. This alone was enough to disprove the Heavenly Hound's statement. Li Tianlan didn't bother to talk nonsense. He just glanced at Heavenly Hound and said lightly, "Who else thinks the same as this chief of staff? Stand out and let me see." After a moment of silence, a few more people came out. The crowd was even quieter. There were not many people who came out to support Heavenly Hound, only 5 or 6, but they were not unknown people. They were all people in various key positions in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. They were undoubtedly Heavenly Hound's team. Li Tianlan found that he didn't know any of these people, and he could confirm that they were not old people from the Li family. He was slightly relieved. Heavenly Hound took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said softly, "Thank you for your dedication to the Li family, Your Majesty. Now, please return Emperor Dong's palace. We will assist young Master Huo to control everything, Your Majesty can rest assured." A blatant seizure of power. Li Tianlan looked at the crowd behind Heavenly Hound. No one clearly supported this small team. But when many people met Li Tianlan's eyes, they subconsciously looked away. Among them, there were many veterans of the Li family that Li Tianlan was familiar with. Li Tianlan understood Heavenly Hound's reliance. Perhaps in the minds of Heavenly Hound and others, he came today to subdue the purgatory of Heaven Capital, not to kill people. After all, in their minds, Li Kuangtu was already dead, and it was meaningless to kill others. Instead, it would disappoint these old people of the Li family. So Heavenly Hound and others seemed to stand out fearlessly and clamor for power, but in fact, they wanted to keep the purgatory of Heaven Capital advancing in order to retreat. And these old people of the Li family, Li Tianlan was silent. He could probably understand their silence. In a sense, this could not be called betrayal. Heavenly Hound talked a lot of nonsense, but at least one thing was true. That was, although his name was Li Tianlan, the real situation was that his surname was not Li. He was not the grandson of Li Honghe, nor the son of Li Kuangtu. In terms of blood relationship, he was indeed an outsider of the Li family. How important was a surname? When the treason case broke out abruptly, the Li family was full of talents and experts. It was no exaggeration to say that if everyone in the Li family's camp revealed the intention to change sides, it was not difficult for anyone to find another way out. But these people didn't die from the beginning to the end. They followed Li Honghe out of Yuzhou and the highest stage of Zhongzhou state and endured more than 20 years of suffering. Some people faked their deaths to get away, but many others really died on the border. Why did all this? It was for the name, Li. When Li Tianlan was Li Honghe's grandson, everyone regarded him as the young master and the future hope of the Li family. Under Li Honghe's will, they were even willing to stand against Li Kuangtu for him. But now, his true identity had not been exposed. But Li Kuangtu had already said that Li Tianlan had nothing to do with him. In such a situation, Li Tianlan had nothing to do with Li Kuangtu, which meant that he had no blood relationship with the Li family in many people's minds. Some people could accept this and choose to follow Li Honghe's will to stand by Li Tianlan. There were some such people in Emperor Dong's palace. There were also some in the purgatory of Heaven Capital headed by Li Huazhong. And the others, they didn't want to choose Li Kuangtu, especially after Li Kuangtu chose to cooperate with Gu Xingyun. But they were also entangled in the issue of Li Tianlan's identity. So at this moment, facing Li Tianlan, they could only remain silent. "Uncle Huiyun, do you agree with Heavenly Hound?" Li Tianlan began to call names directly. His eyes fell on a one-armed middle-aged man. This was an old man of the Li family whom Li Tianlan was very familiar with. He left the border camp a year earlier than Li Tianlan and had a very good relationship with him. Compared with Li Tianlan's somewhat indifferent impression of Li Huazhong, Li Tianlan had more things to remember about this Uncle Huiyun. The first roasted hamster he had eaten when he was a child was given to him by this uncle. In that camp, it was already an extremely rare delicacy. The corners of Huiyun's mouth moved, and he felt a little bitter. "Your teacher is now in Reki City and will be back soon. Aren't you going to go back with me to see him?" Li Tianlan continued to ask. Uncle Huiyun was Fireman's apprentice, which many people knew. He had planned to follow Fireman's path and break through to the invincible realm at the Fire-Flaming Realm. But after the treason case, Fireman was imprisoned in the desert prison. Disheartened, Huiyun entered the thunder-shocking realm. Later, he was injured in a battle at the border and lost an arm. He had no hope of entering the invincible realm. But he should always remember the friendship of those years. "God?" Uncle Huiyun gave a wry smile and seemed to want to call his name. But as soon as the words came out, he sighed and said hoarsely, "Your Majesty, what's your surname? Is it important?" Li Tianlan looked into his eyes and said in a soft voice, "I grew up in the Li family. Whether I'm related by blood or not, Senior Li will always be my grandfather. I'm a member of the Li family and the current patriarch of the Li family. What's different? It's different, Hui Yun murmured. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and said softly, if you insist on an answer, uncle, in terms of blood relationship, my surname should be Dongqing. He suddenly froze. By now, he had already known his background, but he had been avoiding it. So far, he only knew his surname, but he didn't know what his name was in the Dongqing clan. Dongqing clan, Dongqing Rushi? Hui Yun froze for a moment, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Vaguely, he seemed to know Li Honghe's plan at that time. Heavenly Hound obviously realized something. His face changed obviously, and he said in a deep voice, since your majesty has admitted that your surname is not Li, how can you be the patriarch of the Li family? We can discuss about Emperor Dong's palace slowly, but the purgatory of heaven capital belongs to the Li family. How can it be handed over to the Dongqing clan? I'm talking to the senior. What right do you have to interrupt? Li Tianlan glanced at Heavenly Hound coldly. Heavenly Hound took half a step back subconsciously, then gritted his teeth and stood where he was. He said in a cold voice, Your Majesty is really overbearing, but as a member of the purgatory of heaven capital, don't I even have the right to speak? Your Majesty came here today to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital. In any case, I, Heavenly Hound, will be the first to be unconvinced. Conquer the purgatory of heaven capital? Li Tianlan murmured to himself, and then suddenly laughed. He looked at Heavenly Hound, and the temperature in his eyes dropped little by little, getting colder and colder. Who told you that I came here today to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital? Uneasiness rose from Heavenly Hound's heart without warning. He suddenly raised his head. In his sight was Li Tianlan's indifferent face without any expression. I came here today, Li Tianlan's voice paused. I came here to kill. The sword energy surged. With Heavenly Hound as the center, the space within a radius of several meters instantly froze. The small team centered on Heavenly Hound was completely enveloped by the sword energy, and no one was missing. The sword energy extended without any warning, but Wuxia, who had just spoken, was missed. The faces of Heavenly Hound and the others changed dramatically, and they almost instinctively broke out with all their strength. The blue arc of lightning flashed in the sword energy for a moment. Humph! Li Tianlan snorted coldly. The sword energy around them suddenly rotated. It was silent. The flashing arc of lightning was completely extinguished. Heavenly Hound, whose eyes were full of remorse, opened his mouth. Your Majesty, please. Before he could finish his words, the layers of sword chi had already streaked across each of their bodies like streams of light. Their bodies were torn apart silently. Blood gushed out. The dense sword light kept flying. Before the pieces of the corpses and blood fell to the ground, they had been completely smashed into pieces of powder by the endless sword energy. The red powder fell to the ground, and it was dark red. The audience was silent. Before everyone came to their senses, Li Tianlan's voice continued to ring. At the same time, let Li Kuang to see what kind of state the purgatory of heaven capital is now. Phoenix's body suddenly shook. She looked up at Li Tianlan and said in a hoarse voice, What did you say? Tianlan, Kuang-tu is not dead? Li Huazhang also came to his senses and asked hurriedly. He's still alive. Li Tianlan nodded. If I didn't say that he was dead, how could I see today's good show? His mood was up and down. The crowd became more and more silent. Li Tianlan glanced at Hui Yun again. It seemed that he was talking to him, but also to all the elders of the Li family. In terms of blood, I am indeed an outsider of the Li family, but Rushi is Grandpa's biological granddaughter and Li Kuang-tu's biological daughter. You can go to Emperor Dong's palace to find Li Kuang-tu and ask if it is true. Like Grandpa, I despise Li Kuang-tu. But this man's pride and stubbornness have not changed for many years. At least he still has a sense of shame. You can ask if Rushi is his daughter, and you can ask if he really has a deep sibling relationship with the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's body slowly rose into the air. Grandpa doesn't approve of Li Kuang-tu, and the future of the Li family has nothing to do with him. But Rushi is my woman, and her health is slowly improving. In the future, the child of Rushi and me will naturally be the heir of the Li family and the future patriarch of the Li family. In the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the sword energy that blocked the sky dissipated silently. That's all I have to say. From today on, the Purgatory of Heaven capital will be free. You can choose your side freely. Those who choose to return to Emperor Dong's palace are still my uncles and aunties. Those who stand on the opposite side of Emperor Dong's palace are my enemies from now on. His figure took a step forward in the air and disappeared instantly. The next second, Li Tianlan's body appeared in the bedroom of the villa in the center of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The spacious bedroom was surrounded by the faint body fragrance of a woman, which seemed to be the smell of phoenix. In a small bed beside the big bed, a child who looked only 2 or 3 years old was sleeping soundly. Li Tianlan looked at the child quietly, his eyes extremely calm. He took a step forward and stretched out his finger. Chapter 1257. The moment when his fingers were about to fall. In the slightly narrow room, the sudden surge of mental power exploded into a pure and sharp sword aura. The sword energy was dense and sharp, spreading in every corner of the room. The tea table, the chair, the dining table, and the tea were completely shattered, and the water splashed in the air. For a moment, it seemed that everything in the room had become a sword, and all of them rushed to Li Tianlan. What the fuck do you want to do? Li Tianlan, if you dare to touch Huo, I will make you pay. The violent and suppressed roar echoed in the room, and Li Guangtu's body rushed over with the flying sword energy. Li Tianlan's body moved. There was a slight sound of civilization in the room. A transparent air vortex rotated rapidly with Li Tianlan as the center, and the sword energy rushing from behind all pierced into the vortex and became a part of it. The transparent vortex expanded, and the edge hit Li Guangtu hard, directly sweeping his body out. The expanding vortex covered half of the room, and also Li Huaqing, who was standing beside Li Tianlan. Li Guangtu, whose body hit the wall hard, looked pale, but instantly turned red. He stared at Li Tianlan with a twisted expression, with monstrous anger. Look, he's anxious. Li Tianlan pointed to Li Guangtu and said to Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing's mouth twitched, and he didn't speak. He squinted and quietly looked at the bright screen in front of him. The huge screen was clear and bright, showing the bedroom on the other side of the screen perfectly in front of them. There was another Li Tianlan on the screen. At this time, he was standing in front of the baby's crib, stretching out his finger and gently tapping the face of the sleeping baby. The 2-year-old child moved in a daze and turned over, but he didn't wake up. Instead, he stretched out 2 chubby little hands in his sleep and held Li Tianlan's finger. Inside and outside the screen, a smile appeared on the lips of the 2 Li Tianlan at the same time. No matter how complicated the grudge between us is, I won't go so far as to attack a child. Why are you nervous? Li Tianlan slowly turned around and glanced at Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu snorted and struggled to stand up. His physical condition was extremely poor. He had never recovered from the serious injuries he suffered in the chaos of Snow Country. He was even more seriously injured in the battle in North Sea. Later, he participated in the siege of Li Tianlan. If Xianyuan Wushang hadn't taken action after he was captured, Li Guangtu wouldn't have woken up now. He had been held captive for more than a month, and Li Guangtu had been trying to recover from his injuries. Naturally, there was some effect, but with the forced attack just now, his injuries suddenly worsened again. What do you want? Li Guangtu looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and asked. Li Tianlan's expression was calm, and his eyes seemed deep and empty. But looking at Li Tianlan's expression now, he couldn't capture anything. If he wasn't very familiar with the 24 moves of sword, Li Guangtu wouldn't even be sure that what was left in Emperor Dong's palace was just a sword chi doppelganger. Xianyuan City, Tiandu City. The 2 cities were hundreds of kilometers apart. Li Tianlan's real body went to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but the sword chi doppelganger could still move around in Emperor Dong's palace. The most exaggerated thing was that the 2 sides were obviously connected to each other. That was to say, Li Tianlan's real body knew what was happening here. Every word he said was equivalent to Li Tianlan communicating with him through the sword Qi doppelganger hundreds of kilometers away. In a sense, this was no longer something that could be explained by pure martial arts. Not to mention that he hadn't broken through. Even if Li Tianlan really entered that supreme realm, he couldn't do this. Now the real body and the doppelganger were so far away from each other, but they could still communicate with each other. The only explanation was that Ruthless, or Xianyuan Feng, was here. Ruthless energy had been used up, but it was not completely gone. Its remaining energy was enough to stimulate the activity on the sword body, and then carry Li Tianlan's sword Qi to form a special sword Qi doppelganger. And the ability to do this also proved that the relationship between Xianyuan Feng and Li Tianlan could no longer be said to be a simple relationship between man and sword. The bond between man and sword was constantly deepening. Now Xianyuan Feng could almost be said to be a part of Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan picked up the remote control and turned off the screen in front of him. What would happen next in the purgatory of heaven capital hundreds of kilometers away? Except for Li Tianlan, Li Guangtu and Li Huaqing could no longer see. Li Guangtu's heart sank slightly. What do I want? Didn't I make it clear enough? Li Tianlan said calmly, I want the purgatory of heaven capital. Now I can let you go. After returning to the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital, I will announce that the purgatory of heaven capital is officially incorporated into Emperor Dong's palace. The overall structure of the purgatory of heaven capital will be retained. I will only select a part of the core personnel to enter Emperor Dong's palace. From now on, you can become the first deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. At the same time, the purgatory of heaven capital will still be under your leadership. Emperor Dong's palace will not interfere with the development of the purgatory of heaven capital. But when necessary, the purgatory of heaven capital must be under my command. As long as Emperor Dong's palace exists, the name of the purgatory of heaven capital will exist. After your death, Huawu will completely inherit the purgatory of heaven capital and maintain a higher degree of freedom. After a pause, Li Tianlan continued, I don't like roundabout things, and I don't like negotiations. But after knowing of your existence, I've always wanted to talk to you. I didn't want to see you before because I was giving you the cold shoulder, hoping that you could calm down. Between you and me, there's no need to play the game of asking for a sky-high price and returning the money on the spot. I've given you the conditions, and this is my bottom line. Grandpa asked me to take charge of the Li family before he died, so I have the obligation to take all the power of the Li family into my hands. The purgatory of heaven capital must be incorporated into Emperor Dong's palace, just as I said. If you say anything else, I won't agree. What I can decide is what I told you, and it is also the structure of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. In Li Guangtu's silence, Li Tianlan simply summarized, if I am Zhongzhou State, you are Beihai. This was Li Tianlan's attitude. It was clear, without any leeway, aggressive, but it also gave Li Guangtu enough space. What he wanted was the integrity of the Li family, to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital, and to conquer Li Guangtu. But he would not interfere too much with the internal affairs of the purgatory of heaven capital and give it a high degree of freedom. But nominally, the purgatory of heaven capital must belong to Emperor Dong's palace and become a subsidiary force of Emperor Dong's palace. And when necessary, that is, when facing foreign enemies, the purgatory of heaven capital must unite with Emperor Dong's palace against foreign enemies. It was equivalent to the relationship between Zhongzhou State and Beihai Province today. However, when these conditions were listed one by one, Emperor Dong's palace gave more restrictions to the purgatory of heaven capital than Zhongzhou State gave to Beihai. But these extra restrictions were for better control of the purgatory of heaven capital. In other words, as long as the purgatory of heaven capital was dominated by the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace, the purgatory of heaven capital was highly free. Li Tianlan felt that he had done his best in this condition, and the conditions in all aspects were also very mature. Emperor Dong's palace had fully developed, and it was the era of Emperor Dong. In front of everyone in Emperor Dong's palace, there was a beautiful picture of mountains and rivers. Zhongzhou State, Tian'an, East Island, Europe, America. Time passed, and the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace would spread to the whole world over time. Such a Emperor Dong's palace had completely suppressed the purgatory of heaven capital in terms of influence, talent reserve, high-end combat capability, wealth, and intelligence channels. And Li Tianlan himself had reached the top of the divine list. The siege also fully showed that Li Tianlan's personal combat capability had completely surpassed Li Guangtu's. Throughout the hundreds of years of the Li family, Li Tianlan could now be said to be the strongest patriarch. And now he had caught Li Guangtu, controlled his life and death, and controlled the life and death of his children. Under such circumstances, he gave Li Guangtu his own conditions. If Li Guangtu still refused, then no matter what happened in the future, he would basically not change his attitude. This was the final negotiation between the two branches of the Li family, and Li Huaqing was the witness. And Li Tianlan also gave conditions that were not difficult to accept, including what he had just told Li Guangtu, the high degree of freedom after the purgatory of heaven capital joined Emperor Dong's palace, and his position in Emperor Dong's palace. The first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace was completely under Li Tianlan. With Li Tianlan's temperament, since he gave him this position, it was impossible that he would not dare to give him the responsibility he should bear. So Li Guangtu did not have to worry about having no real power in Emperor Dong's palace. There were 3 deputy palace lords in Emperor Dong's palace: Saint, Hidden God, and Li Shi. What did this mean? First of all, Saint used to be the first senior brother of Mount Shu. The 4 sword masters of Mount Shu were now in different positions, but they had a very good personal relationship with each other. Now Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, was in the purgatory of heaven capital. If Li Guangtu was willing to join Emperor Dong's palace, Saint would not take the initiative to make things difficult for Li Guangtu because of his relationship with Yun Qinshi. In the same way, Li Beidian would not make things difficult for Li Guangtu. Sidu Tongyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state, was Li Guangtu's confidant many years ago. Now she chose to stand on Li Tianlan's side. After Li Guangtu joined, no matter whether the two could get back together or not, the old friendship would always be there. In the case of not violating the principle, Sidu Tongyue would also support Li Guangtu to a certain extent. Li Shi's situation was even more complicated. The grievances between her and Li Guangtu were enough to be written in a book. But if they were really in the same camp, Li Shi might not fully support Li Guangtu, but at least she would not make things difficult for him. Such a situation could be said to be very good. As long as Li Guangtu was willing to come with the purgatory of heaven capital, he did not have to worry about whether he could gain a foothold in Emperor Dong's palace or not. He could quickly establish his own prestige in Emperor Dong's palace and work together with Li Tianlan to make Emperor Dong's palace better, to make the Li family surpass the peak of the past hundreds of years, and to create a new situation. The high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace would not make things difficult for him. With the purgatory of heaven capital and his own strength, he could become a super heavyweight in Emperor Dong's palace, and his status was only below Li Tianlan. The most important thing was, it was the condition that Li Tianlan did not tell him, but he heard through the screen. Dongqing Rushi was his daughter. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi's future child would inherit the Li family. If Li Tianlan was an outsider, then the child born by Dongqing Rushi could definitely be regarded as the blood of the Li family. So, what was there for Li Guangtu to be dissatisfied with? Li Guangtu was silent and seemed to be thinking. But there was silence in his eyes. Li Tianlan waited patiently for a full 5 minutes before he calmly said, "Agree or refuse? You won't kill me, will you?" Li Guangtu suddenly laughed. He looked at Li Huaqing, who had been silent, and said, "President, he won't kill me, will he?" Li Huaqing, who had been watching silently, chuckled and did not speak. He naturally wanted to save Li Guangtu's life. But now that he said this, there was no doubt that he was making the decision for Li Tianlan. At this time, how could Li Huaqing make such a mistake? We all understand. Li Guangtu's smile gradually widened. Although I don't know what happened outside, I know that the president has lived here for a while. What is worth him doing this? He looked at Li Tianlan and said lightly, "I think I still have some value, so if I'm not wrong, the president came for me, right? He wants you to let me go?" And you don't intend to let me go, so you have a conflict? Li Tianlan did not speak, just looked at him silently. So as long as the president is still here, it means that the parliament can use me, so you dare not kill me. Li Tianlan still did not speak. Today, he and Li Huaqing came to see Li Guangtu. Naturally, it was not a sudden idea. It was the first time that Li Huaqing came to him after living here for so long, and he seriously asked to see Li Guangtu. With Qin Weibai's previous reminder, Li Tianlan naturally understood that the other party was going to have a showdown with him. But Qin Weibai said that something would happen in Yuzhou these days. But now Emperor Dong's palace had not received any news. Li Huaqing's showdown with him this time seemed a little sudden. But Li Tianlan was ready, and there was no reason to refuse him, so he came here with Li Huaqing. He gave him the conditions. And the timing was perfect. Whether he would be an enemy or a friend in the future depended on Li Guangtu's choice. He had spared Li Guangtu's life, and now he gave him the best opportunity. If he still could not grasp it, Li Tianlan did not think he could do more. I refuse. Li Guangtu looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, maybe the conditions you offer are very tempting, but this is not what I want. In this world only I am qualified to represent the Li family. Even if I am not your opponent for the time being, you are not qualified to represent the Li family. If I can't beat you, I will join you. If I, Li Guangtu, am such a person, I don't deserve today's achievements. The Li family was stubborn. Li Guangtu was not only stubborn, but also completely extreme. Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. Li Guangtu's eyes were full of persistence, and behind this persistence, there was also a touch of hatred. Li Tianlan naturally did not know that the teenager named Huo died in the final battle of Heaven Capital, and he did not want to know. What he knew was the current result. Li Guangtu chose to refuse. Don't you worry about the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital? Don't you worry about your woman and son? Li Tianlan asked. Does it make sense? Li Guangtu's smile remained unchanged, and his voice was indifferent. You kill them, and you'd better kill me. From today on, the Li family will be destroyed with me. Otherwise, if I don't die today, if you dare to touch them, I am indeed not your opponent, but in the whole Emperor Dong's palace, who else can be my opponent except you? Li Tianlan nodded. You refuse? Only I can represent the Li family. Li Guangtu said indifferently, I refuse. His attitude was clear, and there was no room for negotiation. Li Tianlan nodded and slowly turned around. He glanced at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing was also looking at him. His eyes were a little relaxed and a little expectant. Li Tianlan nodded to him and said, You talk. He had finished talking with Li Guangtu. This was also the only time they had a formal conversation. He gave the conditions. Li Guangtu chose to refuse. That was all. It was simple. Li Tianlan walked slowly to the door. When he was about to go out, he paused and said calmly, I won't kill you today, but from today on, you and I are enemies. Chapter 1258. The sound of the door closing was very slight. This showed that Li Tianlan did not have any anger or unwillingness when he left. It was simple to come and simple to leave. Li Tianlan put forward the conditions. Li Guangtu refused his conditions. The future of the Li family, countless people, countless related families, the pattern of the dark world, unimaginable interests, the future path of the Li family, and the future situation. All of this was like the most ordinary business. They didn't agree on a price, so they parted ways. There was no regret or anger in his words. There might be regret, but it was far from enough to make people turn back. Li Guangtu sat on the ground without any image, leaning against the wall for a long time. Then he took out a pack of cigarettes from his trouser pocket and lit one silently. Through the lingering smoke, Li Huaqing's figure seemed to be a little blurred. Li Guangtu suddenly smiled and said indifferently, Am I free now? You're not really free until you leave Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing sat down on the sofa and said with a smile, You sit down too. I've always wanted to talk to you, but I never had a chance. Today is not the right time, but the occasion is very suitable and safe. Besides, with Tianlan's character, he won't eavesdrop on us. Li Guangtu thought about it, stood up, and sat opposite Li Huaqing. He puffed out the smoke and remained silent. "I'm curious," Li Huaqing said slowly, "why didn't you agree with Tianlan? To be honest, I never thought of the conditions he put forward. The autonomy of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, and the future heir of the Li family. What are you dissatisfied with? Pride, paranoia, unwillingness? These could be said to be reasons, but they were not decisive reasons. The three people who put forward this condition, heard this condition, and witnessed this condition, all knew very well what this condition meant. Once Li Guangtu accepted it, although he, the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, would be under Li Tianlan, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would maintain a pretty good autonomy. Even if Li Tianlan would take away part of the core of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, at least he had to ensure the normal structure of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. That was to say, the framework of the Purgatory of Heaven capital would not change. At least the three top masters, Daybreak, Dawn, and Phoenix, would stay. The elite forces of life-prolonging, undying, and Sanluo temples would also stay. Part of the industries and intelligence agencies of the Purgatory of Heaven capital would also stay. Although Li Guangtu became the deputy palace lord, he could still completely lead the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Although Li Tianlan was the palace lord and could control the Purgatory of Heaven capital to a certain extent, he could not interfere in everything. With the position of the first deputy palace lord and the identities of the other deputy palace lords, Li Guangtu could not only control the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but also control Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. It was impossible for Emperor Dong's palace to settle accounts after the fall, be made a mere figurehead, get rid of the donkey when it was no longer of use, and burn the bridge after crossing the river. Every word of Li Tianlan's condition revealed his sincerity. The two sides exchanged resources at the bottom line. When Li Tianlan could control the Purgatory of Heaven capital to a certain extent, Li Guangtu could also control Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. This was a real win-win situation, a real integration. The Li family would be reunited into one, which was the best situation. And if this merger was successful, both the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace would be greatly strengthened, which was good for both of them. In this state, as long as Li Guangtu gave up his current thoughts and did not target Li Tianlan could not target him again. No matter how much Li Guangtu disliked Li Tianlan, he could just wait. The next patriarch of the Li family was the daughter of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi, Li Guangtu's grandson. Under the circumstances that Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi's names were unlikely to be changed, when the child was born, he would not call Li Guangtu grandfather, but grandfather. And if he sincerely joined Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan could accept him. Even if he did not call him father, he would treat him as an elder. In this way, when the child took over, the grievances between Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu would naturally disappear. Similarly, with the child taking over, the entanglement between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace would be meaningless. Li Huawu's branch could also naturally integrate into the Li family, and there would be no distinction between them. As long as Li Guangtu did not treat himself as an outsider, then no one in Emperor Dong's palace would treat him as an outsider. What was wrong with such a result? But Li Guangtu actually refused. Li Tianlan was not a very aggressive person, but Li Huaqing still did not expect that he would give Li Guangtu such an excellent condition. This was completely impossible in Li Huaqing's mind. After all, everyone could see that the strength of Emperor Dong's palace was now far greater than that of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The condition that Li Tianlan mentioned could only be put forward when the strength of the two sides was equal. But now it was completely unnecessary. Now Li Tianlan insisted on taking over Emperor Dong's palace and hardened his heart to let more people die on both sides. Throwing Li Guangtu a guest position with no real power seemed to be a very good choice. But Li Tianlan did not beat around the bush. When he had completely gained the upper hand and even controlled the life and death of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he gave Li Guangtu such a condition. What made Li Huaqing even more puzzled was that Li Guangtu actually refused. The Li family was stubborn? Was this kind of stubbornness a fool? Li Huaqing looked at Li Guangtu smoking another cigarette, but he didn't mean to give one to himself. He shook his head, took out a cigarette box and lit one. You should be very clear that he can't have better conditions. He can't give you the position of the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace. He can't give you this, and what he gives you is the best. You can feel this kind of sincerity. So what? A very complicated light flashed in Li Guangtu's eyes. There were too many reasons to tell Li Huaqing why. He took a deep drag on the cigarette, and the smoke slowly came out of his nostrils and mouth. Li Guangtu smiled. So, he is still too young. He brought you here to talk to me. There are 3 people here, but you didn't speak, so he regarded this negotiation as a matter of 2 people. Li Guangtu squinted at Li Huaqing. I believe that Li Tianlan is not so scheming now. There are some things that he can't figure out for the time being. After all, he is still not mature enough. But don't you understand? Li Huaqing was silent. Qin Weibai? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. I don't know. Li Huaqing shook his head. Li Guangtu sneered, and his voice was a little cold. She is a disaster to the country and the people. That which deserves to die. Li Huaqing couldn't help laughing. Which? Everything she did was for Tianlan. Not to mention a little infamy, even if there were more things, as long as it was beneficial to Tianlan, she would not hesitate to do it. You hate her to the bone, but doesn't she hate you to the bone? You have tried to kill her man many times. Do you still want to be extravagant? Do you expect her to give you a good end? To be able to meet such a woman is your luck, fortune, and destiny. If you had such a woman by your side all those years ago, how could you appear here today? Li Huaqing was silent. At this moment he thought of Li Shi, the woman who was really willing to let him give up a lot of things to protect. In the battle at the border that year, the Li family collapsed, and the winner took all. But now looking back, if Li Shi had helped him with all her strength at that time instead of choosing to stab him at the most critical moment, what would the result be? Li Guangtu took a deep breath and didn't speak. His face was gloomy. If I hadn't come with Tianlan, would you have agreed to his conditions? Li Huaqing looked at Li Guangtu and asked. At this moment, there seemed to be a lot of things hidden in his eyes. Li Guangtu sneered. If I had agreed to his conditions, would you have let me and the purgatory of heaven capital live? Li Huaqing didn't speak. He sat there quietly, as calm as the ocean. The answer is obvious, isn't it? Li Guangtu said in a mocking tone. President, you and I are of the same generation. When I was at the height of my success, you had just started. When you had a meteoric rise, I had been knocked down from the clouds to the dust. But I know far more about Zhongzhou State and you than Li Tianlan. Zhongzhou State's evaluation of you is that you are gentle and stable. This evaluation is indeed correct, but it is only one side of it. At the critical moment, your former opponents are very clear about how ruthless you are. Those who have really paid attention to you are also very clear about it. After I joined Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace merged into one, the power in Li Tianlan's and my hands has more than doubled. Li Tianlan, me, Lin Fengting, Li Shi, Zhangyue, Saint, Daybreak, Military Counselor, Dawn, Phoenix, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, Yun Qinshi, Li Beidan, Baiyun. After all the hidden dangers of the Li family are eliminated, what kind of strength is this to put out this lineup? Not to mention this era, even in the peak of the Wang family of Beihai, I'm talking about the period when the Wang family of Beihai had the Li family, can Beihai resist our lineup? The combination of this lineup means that Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital will no longer have any opponents in the dark world. It means that Li Tianlan and I will really keep our word in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. It means that we can instantly unify Tianan. It means that we can directly recapture East Island. It means that we can directly conquer Beihai. Can you sleep with such a lineup in front of you? What's the point of winning over Jiang Shangyu and protecting Gu Xingyun in front of such a lineup? It's meaningless. Li Huaqing said with a serious face. If it's meaningless, it can't exist. Li Guangtu said blandly, it's not Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun that can't exist, but me and even Emperor Dong's palace. In the final analysis, it's the Li family. According to the character of the current young patriarch of Beihai, stability should be the priority in the next few years. And with all due respect, in the past 2 years, you and Chen Fangqing have tortured them a lot. Chen Fangqing is dead, so the resentment will naturally focus on you. The young patriarch doesn't like you either. They may have conflicts with Emperor Dong's palace in the future, but they will definitely not stand on the side of Zhongzhou state, so you can't win over the Wang family of Beihai. And if the Purgatory of Heaven capital merges with Emperor Dong's palace, you can't find a force that can balance us in the whole Zhongzhou state or even the whole dark world, let alone a force that has the courage to stand against us in the open. The combination of Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun is not weak. At most, you can win over Wang Xiaoyao. If I recover from my injury, I can beat Jiang Shangyu. Although Gu Xingyun is tricky, Li Shi can also balance him. If Wang Xiaoyao takes action, Wang Wuxianga will not sit back and do nothing. Moraid's identity is special. Even if you dare to let him join Zhongzhou state openly, other invincible realm experts in Emperor Dong's palace can kill him. In this way, Li Tianlan has no opponent. Even Jiang Shangyu can't bear this kind of pressure. And once such a phenomenon appears, it proves that the Li family after the merger of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace has been out of control and completely out of the control of Zhongzhou state. President, I know you very well. You won't allow this to happen. Li Kuangtu smiled and said, if I really agree, you will stop it. If you can't stop it, then the overall power of Zhongzhou state will probably attack the Li family in all aspects. Emperor Dong's palace will suffer heavy losses, and so will the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But in the end, it's the Li family that will be weakened as a whole, right? After all, that silly boy is too young and not mature enough. He dotes on and trusts Qin Weibai too much, so he should have told Qin Weibai his bottom line long ago. Of course, Qin Weibai didn't disappoint his trust. But after all, she is not a member of the Li family, and she doesn't want to understand the Li family. That siren only has Li Tianlan in her eyes, and she doesn't care about anything else. This mentality will also make her go to extremes on anything related to Li Tianlan. She only wants Li Tianlan to be safe, and she doesn't care about anything else. The conditions put forward by Li Tianlan are very good, and I have the possibility to agree. Once I agree, I will first face the suppression of you and Zhongzhou state. Not to mention anything else, just this alone is a risk in Qin Weibai's eyes, so she doesn't want to see this. And I have tried to kill her man many times, so she naturally can't tolerate me. That's why you and that silly boy came to talk to me today. He is now in full swing, like the sun at high noon, so he naturally won't think so much. Tut, this is the good thing about being immature. Young and frivolous, he dares to offend everyone. Our merger will cause Zhongzhou state to be afraid of us. Maybe he doesn't think of it, but he doesn't care. Look, this is Dongwang's confidence. Qin Weibai is a very smart woman. The smartest thing about her is that she can protect Li Tianlan to the greatest extent, and at the same time, she can make Li Tianlan not feel disgusted with her like she is doing it for his own good. So on this matter, she didn't persuade Li Tianlan, but asked you to come with him. Li Tianlan doesn't care about some things or is too lazy to see clearly, but Qin Weibai knows that I understand. In the face of the all-round suppression of Zhongzhou state, how can we fight? We can't fight. If we really fall out, Li Tianlan and I can barely survive. Zhongzhou state may suffer a great loss, but the Li family will be gone after all. That's my Li family. I'm extreme, paranoid, but also timid. I can see the consequences of what Li Tianlan dares to do, so I don't dare to do it, and I don't dare to agree to his conditions. Qin Weibai can see this, so when you walked into this room with him, the siren already knew the result. I refused Li Tianlan, and in the future, if she wants to kill me or plot against me, she will have no scruples. Li Kuangtu's voice was slow, but it was extremely stable and clear. Li Huaqing had been listening in silence. During the whole process, he smoked 2 cigarettes in a row. When Li Kuangtu's voice disappeared, he sighed and laughed. So you refused Li Tianlan, to some extent, to protect him? I am protecting the Li family. Li Kuangtu's voice was cold. In some ways, he and Li Tianlan had always had a tacit understanding. For example, he could use external forces to deal with Li Tianlan, and even join forces with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, but he had never touched Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan could be merciless to him, but from beginning to end, at least before today, he had never targeted other people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. In their hearts, each other's industries were their future industries, so both sides had a tacit understanding to protect these. Today, although Li Tianlan killed a few people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, none of them were from the Li family. They were just high-level officials of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He could fight with Li Tianlan to the death, but under the overall situation, he could not allow others to plot against the Li family. I suddenly think of the chaos in Snow Country. Li Huaqing smiled and said, "If you had known this day would come, would you still have lent your sword to Li Tianlan in Snow Country?" Chaos in Snow Country, Trial Day. It was because of the sword that Li Guangtu lent to Li Tianlan that Li Tianlan could control Li Guangtu's sword energy with perfect sword intent to rush out of the desperate situation and let the trial day come to an end. Li Guangtu said lightly, "At that time, he could be said to have lost the face of the Li family. After all, it was too ugly." Paranoid. Li Huaqing seemed to have completely understood the meaning of this word in the Li family. He nodded slowly and said, "Is this the reason you refused Li Tianlan?" "This is a reason you can accept," Li Huaqing said calmly. Reason? If he wanted to say it, he could say a lot. From the very beginning, he was not convinced that Li Honghe put all his chips on Li Tianlan. In Li Honghe's plan, everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital was prepared for Li Tianlan. As Li Honghe's biological son, Li Guangtu was just a transitional figure. How could he be convinced? In the Qingyun Temple in Lin, the dragon vein guarded by Master Xianxia had pulled him back from death. If the dragon vein condensed the fate of Zhongzhou state was given to him, then in the final battle of Heaven Capital, his first move was enough to defeat Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai. But the dragon vein was finally given to Li Tianlan by the old bald ass. How could he be willing? He was a young boy, an outsider of the Li family. Why did he do that? This was jealousy. Li Guangtu never denied this. He was jealous of everything Li Tianlan had since he was a child, which should have been his. So he held the purgatory of Heaven Capital in his hand tightly, trying to seize the opportunity to make the boy who occupied everything he had disappear completely. Li Tianlan entered the secular world. The chaos in East Island began. Before he could do anything, the Samsara Palace had blocked the gate of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. So the final battle of Heaven Capital changed from killing Li Tianlan to cooperating with the Samsara Palace to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital enter the secular world smoothly. And all this was because of the Samsara Palace, because of a woman who even he was amazed by, who was known as a goddess in the dark world. At that time, Li Guangtu understood that even if he held the purgatory of Heaven Capital tightly, the young boy he had always been jealous of and looked down upon would stand up again in another direction with the power of a woman, and then become his biggest opponent to control the Li family. Li Guangtu's failure was because of women. Li Tianlan's success was also because of women. The contrast was so obvious. How could Li Guangtu not be jealous? There was also his first son, whom he had high hopes for and had already raised. Huo, who died in Ninghu. Some clues almost pointed to the Samsara Palace. Although there was no evidence, what evidence did people like Li Guangtu need? The most important thing was, join Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu didn't want to. If he didn't want to, he didn't want to. They were all reasons. Every one of them was a reason. As for joining Emperor Dong's palace, Li Guangtu couldn't think of an excuse to convince himself to ignore these reasons. It doesn't matter. Li Huaqing smiled and said, "At least this reason is true, and I can accept it." "So, I'm free?" Li Guangtu's voice was a little dull. "I'll try my best." Li Huaqing said calmly, "Fight for your freedom. I'm 99% sure that I can take you out of the purgatory of Heaven Capital today." His voice paused. Li Huaqing looked at him and didn't speak. "The premise is, what can you do for me and for Zhongzhou state? Are you optimistic about Li Tianlan?" Li Kuangtu suddenly asked. To be exact, it's the mature Tianlan that I'm optimistic about. Li Huaqing's expression was very serious. It's strange and contradictory. So, you saved me today for Li Tianlan. Am I right? Li Kuangtu suddenly laughed. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and directly acquiesced. Li Kuangtu was a smart man and mature enough. There was no need to hide some things because they couldn't be hidden at all. I see. Li Kuangtu nodded and said, if I join Emperor Dong's palace, the Li family will be out of control and completely out of control. This is not what you want. So, you want me to continue to be an enemy of Emperor Dong's palace? No, to be exact, you want me to continue to join forces with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In this way, the three of us can form a force that can balance Emperor Dong's palace. He stared into Li Huaqing's eyes and said, you saved me just to let Li Tianlan kill me in the future. You want me to be a stumbling block on Li Tianlan's way to help him grow up quickly? Or a whetstone? This is a test for Li Tianlan? Li Kuangtu's smile was a little twisted. You're a smart man. Li Huaqing said slowly, do you agree or refuse? I won't be a puppet. Li Kuangtu sneered and said, if I leave Emperor Dong's palace, I will integrate all the forces in my hands, try my best to kill Li Tianlan at any cost, and take back the power of the Li family. In this matter, I won't show any mercy. If he dies in my hands, what will you do? Kill me? Li Huaqing looked at him expressionlessly and said coldly, you can kill Tianlan, which naturally proves that you are more valuable than Tianlan. Why should I kill you? In my heart, you are his whetstone, but you can be a knife. Li Kuangtu looked into his eyes. Facing his eyes, Li Huaqing didn't give in at all. After a long time, Li Kuangtu took a deep breath and slowly nodded. Li Huaqing turned and walked to the door. It was also straightforward. He said, wait for my news. Chapter 1259. The wind in Emperor Dong's palace was soft and comfortable. Li Tianlan sat at the table on the balcony, silently drinking tea and casually enjoying the scenery in Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai, who got up a little late, arranged the fruit plate on the table into a pattern of a smiling face. Her smile was like a flower. Very happy? Li Tianlan asked softly. Yes, as long as you don't bully me, I am happy every day. Qin Weibai chuckled and reached out to touch Li Tianlan's hair. Li Tianlan grabbed her slightly cold and delicate palm and gently bit her fingers. Her white and slender fingers were stained with a little juice. It was fragrant and slightly sweet. Li Tianlan's whole body seemed to melt in this slight touch. He pulled Qin Weibai's body over and sat her on his lap. His other hand naturally wrapped around her waist. Qin Weibai laughed and took out a strawberry from the fruit plate. Do you want to eat it? Li Tianlan shook his head. His and Qin Weibai's eating habits were completely opposite. Qin Weibai usually drank the dew of a special plant that only grew near the polar circle. It was extremely demanding on the environment, temperature, light, and land. Emperor Dong's palace and the Lin clan had now set up this kind of laboratory to cultivate this plant. It cost a lot, but the harvest was not great. This plant could currently grow in Emperor Dong's palace, but Qin Weibai didn't like it very much, so her daily drinking was airlifted from Snow Country or Reki City. When it came to 3 meals a day, most of the time when the workload was not heavy, Qin Weibai's breakfast was usually a small but varied fruit, a piece of egg white, and half a glass of juice. When the workload was heavy, she would add a small steak and a small cup of coffee for breakfast. For lunch, she had 1 or 2 taels of rice, a small bowl of soup, and a few light vegetables. Basically, there was no meat. Most of the dinner was porridge, and occasionally she would eat some desserts she made herself. As for Li Tianlan's diet, fruit? Vegetables? What the hell were those? 3 meals a day, from morning to night, meat, meat, meat. Eating regularly to nourish the stomach were all nonsense. In terms of eating, he didn't like any fruit. The only thing he liked was meat, and he didn't even care about the taste. Qin Weibai took a small bite of the strawberry and laughed again. She sat on Li Tianlan's lap and gently twisted her waist. Are you so happy because of Li Kuangtu? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Qin Weibai was a little confused. She thought about it and nodded. Part of the reason. I don't like this person, and I don't want to be with him. It's good that he can leave Emperor Dong's palace now. Li Tianlan played with her soft long hair and said nothing. Qin Weibai quietly ate the fruit. Her movements were very delicate. After she finished the strawberry in her hand, she picked up a wet towel and wiped her hands. Then she wrapped her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and said softly, "Are you unhappy?" "Not really." Li Tianlan shook his head. "I gave him the best conditions, but he refused. It's a pity that we didn't reach an agreement." Regarding Li Guangtu, he didn't have any complicated thoughts. He didn't have a good impression of him, but he didn't dislike him much either. He and Li Guangtu were enemies, but Li Guangtu was a very stubborn person. Such people were often very pure. Even if they were enemies, he wasn't the kind of person who would make others gnash their teeth and want to kill him. After all, he is Rushi's father. If there is a chance, I don't want to let him go. If he leaves Emperor Dong's palace today, he will only die in the future. Li Tianlan said softly, and even if Grandpa doesn't like him, he doesn't want him to go this way. This is his own choice. Qin Weibai reached out and rubbed Li Tianlan's frowning eyebrows. How about the purgatory of heaven capital? There should be a group of people joining Emperor Dong's palace in the near future. Before I came back, I said what I should say. It's understandable that they think I'm an outsider. But Rushi is not. For those who really care about the Li family, they can completely accept that Mai and Rushi's children will inherit the Li family in the future. This is enough to make some people in the purgatory of heaven capital make up their minds to choose their own side. Li Tianlan said faintly, "I don't want to get involved in the affairs of Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital, and it's not necessary. When Li Guangtu goes back, let's see how many people will choose to come to Emperor Dong's palace. If they are willing to come, they are our people. If they are unwilling to come, they are our enemies. I won't give them too much time. It's not appropriate to move inside Zhongzhou state at this time, so I'll unify Tianan first. I've built a place for the Li family to live. When I drive the purgatory of heaven capital out of Tianan, they can't say that I'm heartless. It's good that you know. I'll support you." Qin Weibai smiled sweetly. Li Tianlan nodded, thought for a moment, and suddenly said, "Something happened in Yuzhou?" Qin Weibai was a little confused. "You said that something would happen in Yuzhou in the next few days, so that Li Huaqing would make up his mind to come to me." Li Tianlan's fingers rubbed Qin Weibai's slender waist. "Li Huaqing has come, but it seems that nothing has happened in Yuzhou." Qin Weibai thought for a moment and smiled. She said, "Maybe something has happened, but we can't see it? Of course, it's also possible that Li Huaqing suddenly figured it out." Li Tianlan didn't ask any more questions. He reached into his pocket, but found nothing. Shaking his head, he patted Qin Weibai's butt. "Go get a pack of cigarettes." Qin Weibai said, "Oh." She stood up and walked to the living room. Her figure swayed lazily, and she looked magnificent. The pleasant bell of the elevator rang for a moment. The elevator door opened. Li Huaqing's figure walked along the corridor to the balcony. Li Tianlan glanced at him and didn't get up. He just nodded and said, "Sit down." Li Huaqing calmly sat down on the sofa opposite Li Tianlan. "How's the talk?" Li Tianlan asked. He gave Li Guangtu a choice. Li Guangtu didn't accept it, so he naturally wouldn't cover the room with sword energy. Now he just needed to know the result, and it didn't matter the process of their negotiation. It was a pleasant talk. Li Huaqing laughed. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly. When he was about to say something, Qin Weibai, who had taken the cigarette, trotted over. Seeing Li Huaqing, she was slightly stunned, and then smiled and said hello. "Make a pot of tea." Li Tianlan opened the cigarette, took out one, and said softly. Qin Weibai said, She smiled and said, "Puh, or green tea?" "Green tea, a little stronger." Li Tianlan lit the cigarette. Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment, and then realized that the person sitting opposite him was Li Tianlan's real body. How long had it been? Had he returned from the purgatory of heaven capital? He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't say anything. Qin Weibai said, and went out again. Li Huaqing looked at Qin Weibai's back and shook his head subconsciously. Lovely, gentle, and obedient. But he had never seen Qin Weibai like this. With a smile, Li Huaqing's voice was a little emotional. Sometimes, even I envy your luck. Li Tianlan took a drag on the cigarette and didn't respond to his teasing. He said straightforwardly, "Let's talk." Li Huaqing's pupils contracted slightly, and he was silent. Li Tianlan was not in a hurry. He smoked and waited quietly. "I'm taking Li Guangtu away today." Li Huaqing was silent for nearly a minute before he slowly said. His voice was indifferent, but he was full of confidence. Chapter 1260. From Li Huaqing's light voice, Li Tianlan felt a kind of almost strong confidence. This was undoubtedly a showdown. But why was it today? What Qin Weibai predicted should have happened in Yuzhou did not happen. Things in Liaodong were still in a stalemate. The Flourishing Age Fund was also as stable as Mount Tai. The situation in Zhongzhou State was generally calm, so why did Li Huaqing suddenly choose today to have a showdown with him? Was it because he valued Li Guangtu so much that he ran out of patience and was in a hurry to get him out to complete the layout before the election? Or was it because something happened inside the academics that could affect Li Huaqing's decision under the situation that no one could see and made Li Huaqing make up his mind? And this matter was obviously not suitable to be exposed now? Qin Weibai knew about this matter, but she did not choose to tell him. Was it because she did not know that this matter would be more beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan glanced in the direction of the living room. In his sight was Qin Weibai's slim and graceful back, light and elegant, and she looked very happy. This woman should be spanked again. Li Tianlan flicked the ash and looked at Li Huaqing. "It seems that you really had a good talk." Li Huaqing laughed and said softly, "He agreed to go with me." "He agreed?" Li Tianlan suddenly sneered. Did the president make a mistake? Or did he forget something? "Li Guangtu is now my captive, a prisoner held here. He agreed to go with you? What value does his will have here? I've locked him up here for so long. Do you think I can let him go just because he agrees?" He narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Huaqing. "You want to take him away without asking for my opinion. Go and ask him first." "Oh, Emperor Dong's palace is a small family, and the president really does not take me seriously." Li Huaqing lowered his eyelids, his expression was neither happy nor angry, and his voice was neither salty nor indifferent. "Then I will tell you now, I will take him away." What was strong? What was overbearing? At this moment, in the face of the president, who many people thought had no temper, for the first time, Li Tianlan felt a great sense of oppression that almost hit him in the face. "I do not agree." He tilted his head, looked at Li Huaqing and sneered, "My attitude is clear. I don't agree. I'd like to see if Li Huaqing can leave Emperor Dong's palace alive if I don't nod my head today." Li Huaqing's body tensed for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up into a half-smile. "Li Huaqing? Slip of the tongue." Li Tianlan said calmly, "I want to talk about Li Guangtu." "A slip of the tongue." Li Huaqing muttered faintly. This was indeed an explainable reason, but it could also be said that Li Tianlan thought so in his heart and said it directly out of straightforwardness. It could also be understood as Li Tianlan's threat. At most, they would just fall out. "I believe you." Li Huaqing nodded. "It's not important." Li Tianlan said, "The important thing is that I have already said that I don't agree. Do you want to try to take him away by force?" "The tea is here." A voice with a hint of laughter rang out. Qin Weibai walked into the balcony with a delicate tray and placed 2 cups of tea in front of Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing respectively. The fragrance of tea and body floated gently. Li Huaqing was silent for a while, then laughed. "Why? If I really wanted to take him away by force, he should be with me now." Li Tianlan turned the teacup expressionlessly, his eyes cold. "Tianlan, you should know very well that Li Guangtu refused to join Emperor Dong's palace. In this situation, you offered such a generous offer, but he refused, which means that he can't join Emperor Dong's palace in the future." Li Huaqing said slowly, "In this case, there is no point in keeping him here." It's much better than letting him out and giving Emperor Dong's palace one more opponent. Li Tanlan said lightly. Sounds like it. Li Huaqing nodded with a smile. But if you keep him locked up, how can you really annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital? A large part of the people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital are from the Li family. They may be on your side or on Li Kuangtu's side, but to put it bluntly, they are in a dilemma. If you keep Li Kuangtu, don't you worry that the Purgatory of Heaven capital and even the elders of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace will have a knot in their hearts? Being locked up here, at least he can still be alive. Li Tanlan said calmly. Li Huaqing looked at him quietly and asked, "You don't want to kill him?" Li Tianlan nodded, but soon shook his head. To be honest, he didn't think about it. He didn't want to kill Li Kuangtu before today. The best plan in his mind was the condition he proposed to Li Kuangtu. This was also in line with the expectations of most people in the Li family. Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital merged without large-scale conflicts. Both sides had their own gains, and they were harmonious. Divided Live Li family reunited, with Li Tianlan as the leader and Li Kuangtu as the assistant, so that the Li family could return to its peak, and then create a dynasty similar to the Wang family of Beihai. This was the best ending. But Li Kuangtu didn't accept it. How good was the condition he proposed? So good that there was only one condition left that could be better than the one he proposed. That was to let Li Kuangtu become the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan would take a step back and become the deputy palace master, and hand over everything in his hands to Li Kuangtu. Apart from this, there was no better condition than what he offered Li Kuangtu. Not even a little bit better. But Li Kuangtu didn't accept it. At that moment, Li Tianlan's mood was very complicated. He was disappointed, angry, self-deprecating, and finally became indifferent. From the second he left the room where Li Kuangtu was imprisoned. In his mind, Li Kuangtu was no longer a question of whether he wanted to kill him or not. Li Kuangtu didn't accept the condition. It didn't matter whether he was proud, paranoid, or ungrateful. Because they were enemies. All enemies could be killed. He felt that he had done his best to Li Kuangtu. So your reason now is not a reason. Li Huaqing said blandly, "You don't care about Li Kuangtu's life or death now. As long as he leaves, you won't show him any mercy. In this case, you have no scruples about not wanting to kill him. Li Kuangtu might have been important to you before, but now that he has chosen to be your enemy, he is not so important anymore. Now he is just your enemy." Just? Li Tianlan laughed. "Do you know that your words are tantamount to asking me to let the tiger go back to the mountain? If I nod today, the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace are likely to pay the price of countless people's lives in the future? If Emperor Dong's palace wants to develop, some sacrifices are inevitable." Li Huaqing's voice was cold. "Then I can at least choose to reduce one enemy." Li Tanlan said coldly. "You can't choose." Li Huaqing did not hesitate to face Li Tianlan's sharpness. He was extremely calm. "I don't agree, and Xianxia state doesn't agree. Purgatory of Heaven capital, Li Kuangtu must be your enemy. From another perspective, you can take this as a test from Xianxia state, or a test from me." "Test?" Li Tianlan seemed to have heard a joke and sneered. "Why do you test me?" Li Huaqing picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. He said slowly, "Because I am the president of Xianxia state now." Chapter 1261. Calm, plain, and condescending. Li Huaqing calmly looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. There was an unprecedented depth in his twinkling eyes. "Just because I'm the president of Xianxia state. What does the position of president mean? All the major corporations advanced and retreated, playing for balance. Similarly, the Senate also had its own conflicts. Sitting in the position of the president, one had to face pressure from all sides. One had to understand compromise and balance, and there were all sorts of restrictions. But in any case, this position was the pinnacle of power in Xianxia state. At some point, if Li Huaqing really wanted to do something, then the so-called pressure and restrictions could be ignored. When he began to put the balance behind him and let the president's will fully show, inside and outside Xianxia state, Li Tianlan, Dongqing Wudi, and even Wang Tianzong were unable to really resist this will. Because this will represented the world's strongest country, the world's most advanced destructive weapons, the world's most terrible wealth, the millions of troops in Zhongzhou state, and the public opinion that could suppress everything. As long as Li Huaqing nodded, all the resources of Zhongzhou state would become his weapons and sharp swords. All the resources. Under such sharpness, Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai, and the so-called wealthy families were like flying snow under the scorching sun, melting quietly. No one could be strong enough to defeat the whole world. At least not now. Wang Tianzong, who was at the peak, and Li Tianlan, who was invincible, fought against this will. The best result was to ensure their own survival. No matter how many trump cards and how deep the foundation of the power they built was, it would be directly destroyed in the moment when this will press down. Li Tianlan asked Li Huaqing why to test him. Because of this. The atmosphere on the balcony suddenly became extremely depressing. The gentle and refreshing wind stopped without a sound. The world was gloomy. Li Huaqing put down the teacup, took a special silver steak, picked up a piece of cantaloupe from the fruit plate, and put it into his mouth. He said with a smile, "Timon, can this identity test you?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Huaqing. His body was completely tense. Li Huaqing looked at him quietly and could clearly see the endless lightning and thunder in his eyes. He suddenly smiled and turned to look at Qin Weibai, who had been silent. He smiled and said, Boss Qin, do you think I'm qualified to test Emperor Dong's palace and Tianlan? After serving tea, Qin Weibai had been sitting quietly beside Li Tianlan. She did not say a word, looking well-behaved and gentle. It seemed that she did not exist at all. But both Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing knew that when the topic reached an impasse, Qin Weibai was definitely the best buffer. Hearing Li Huaqing's question, Qin Weibai smiled and said softly, "The president is naturally qualified. This should be our honor. Everyone in Huaqing knows that those who can pass the president's test are all outstanding. The current MP of Zhongzhou State, Minister Cheng Shilai of the Ministry of Personnel, once said in private that he could have today's achievements because he passed several tests you gave him when he was young." Qin Weibai's voice was calm and unhurried. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears. No matter what the situation was, it was calm and elegant, clear and sweet. But when the content of her words fell into Li Huaqing's ears, the smile on his face suddenly froze. It was like a knife, quietly pressed against his heart when he straightened his chest and was about to fight with Li Tianlan to see who was better, and planned to use all his means to see who was better. Cheng Shilai, a Zhongzhou state councillor of the Ministry of Personnel. This senior councillor, who was very low-key and never showed his talent, had an absolutely pivotal position in the academics. The whole academy had poured unimaginable efforts into Cheng Shilai. Cheng Shilai lived up to the academy's cultivation. He had reached his current position step by step and was recognized by almost all the groups. This was definitely not something that anyone could do. Especially Cheng Shilai's current position. Cheng Shilai controlled the Ministry of Personnel. In some ways, he controlled the personnel power of Zhongzhou State. Cheng Shilai had absolute real power and the absolute heavyweight department. He could be recognized by all the groups in such a sensitive position. This alone was enough to show Cheng Shilai's ability. Li Huaqing had always regarded Cheng Shilai as his successor and had been grooming him. Cheng Shilai had been his secretary, the mayor of Liaodong, the deputy governor, and the mayor of the provincial government. He had entered the top government office in Yuzhou, charged electricity in the youth academy of Zhongzhou State, and served as the deputy speaker and the minister of the Ministry of Personnel in Liaodong. Then he was transferred to the Ministry of Personnel as a deputy. In the year when Li Huaqing reached the peak, Cheng Shilai was the first deputy in the Ministry of Personnel. 5 years ago, he successfully entered the parliament and controlled the Ministry of Personnel. Li Huaqing's trust in him had never been shaken from beginning to end. Without the rise of the Li family, without the turmoil of the overall situation, Li Huaqing was unlikely to be re-elected in this election. Cheng Shilai was the new giant that Li Huaqing and the academy planned to replace after he retired. Now that Li Huaqing could be re-elected, The academy was surprised and had more expectations for Xianxia. He was qualified to be a director this year. But Li Huaqing was still there. Xianxia might as well accumulate for a few years instead of fighting with others for a position that was neither rising nor falling. If Li Huaqing did not retire, he would have the final say in who controlled the Ministry of Personnel. In this way, Xianxia would not be moved. He would stay in the position of the Ministry of Personnel for another 5 years, which was enough for him to use the resources in his hands to really strengthen the academy and let his students spread all over Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing could now use these 5 years to pave the way for him. Xianxia in 5 years was naturally not the same as he was now. At that time, he would have enough capital to strive for the top. 5 years later, Li Huaqing retired and Xianxia replaced him. His goal was at least the prime minister of Zhongzhou state, and even a strong contender for the president. With Li Tianlan's negotiation this time was largely because of Xianxia. Because of Xianxia's present. And also because of Xianxia's future. Just as he had told Qin Weibai. He hoped that Li Tianlan could mature, be absolutely invincible in force, and be immovable in mind. He needed a real, fully mature peerless heavenly son. Such a Li Tianlan was really worthy of him handing over Zhongzhou state to him. Li Huaqing bet that Li Tianlan could fully mature. More than 20 years later, Li Huaqing and the academics would fully support Li Tianlan to become the president of Zhongzhou state. This was a condition that Li Tianlan could not refuse. Once Li Tianlan agreed, the first thing to do was to ensure the influence and scale of the academics before he became the president. Only the support of the academics, which still maintained a strong influence after more than 20 years, was really valuable to him. Therefore, as long as Li Tianlan agreed to cooperate with Li Huaqing, the academics would immediately become Li Tianlan's firmest ally and supporter. Similarly, Li Tianlan would also become the firmest ally and supporter of the academics. The new group was now full of vitality. If it cooperated with the academics, at least in the next 20 years, the academics would not encounter any major crisis. During this period, it was enough for them to adjust the shortcomings of their own structure, make up for many defects, and increase their own foundation. Such cooperation was a real win-win situation. The academics won for a stable foundation for long-term development. The new group won for an infinitely bright future. With the support of Li Tianlan and the new group, the academics would naturally be more confident. Therefore, Li Huaqing already had the idea of pushing Xianxia to the position of president 5 years later. As for Xianxia's current situation, the reason why Li Huaqing chose to show his cards to Li Tianlan today was indeed because of Xianxia. To be exact, it was a phone call from Xianxia. The content of the phone call was somewhat inexplicable. Li Huaqing did not know what it meant at first, but now listening to Qin Weibai's soft voice, he understood everything in an instant. "Are you scheming about Xila's matter?" Li Huaqing asked slowly. "What matter?" Qin Weibai blinked her eyes and said innocently, "I don't quite understand." Li Huaqing subconsciously clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and did not speak. He was a little angry in his heart. But this anger was suppressed by him before it burst out. At this time, extra emotions were meaningless at all. He came to negotiate with Li Tianlan today because of Xianxia. Xianxia talked to him on the phone last night, and what they talked about was just some of his own private affairs. Xianxia's wife had died more than 10 years ago, leaving behind a daughter who was now the vice president of a multinational group in Zhongzhou region. In addition, Xianxia had a son who was 10 years old this year. Xianxia, who had not remarried for more than 10 years after losing his wife, had a 10-year-old son. It was clear what this meant. Li Huaqing knew the existence of that child and had seen him with his own eyes. During festivals, when he and Xianxia met in private, he even gave the child several red envelopes. Illegitimate child. It sounded dishonorable. But that was it. Li Huaqing really did not take it seriously. When one's status reached Xianxia's level, no, even if it was 2 or 3 levels lower than him, basically no one fell because of the problem of lovers and illegitimate children. This kind of problem was not a problem at all when one reached a certain level, But when there was a problem, it would inevitably be raised. When the position was higher, at Xianxia's level, almost all problems were no longer problems. The only problem for people at this level was whether the support from both above and below was enough. As for the rest, it could not be said that it did not matter, but there was really no need to worry too much. Li Huaqing had seen the child and the woman beside Xianxia. Although they had not seen each other many times, the woman had left a deep impression on him. It was almost difficult to find flaws in a woman in all aspects. Appearance, figure, temperament, speech, talent, life, character, she was flawless in all aspects. Just like Qin Weibai now. But a woman who was a little different from Qin Weibai. Her name was Gu Qingqiu. Her identity as a mistress could be said to be Xianxia's only weakness. A weakness that could not be called a weakness. No one would take it seriously. Even Li Huaqing had turned a blind eye to this. He didn't care about it at all. But he did not expect that one day this woman might really become a target for others to attack Xianxia. From the beginning to the end, the existence of this woman was a trap. A near-fatal trap aimed at Xianxia. A lover was really nothing. But if this lover had an extraordinary identity, this kind of trouble was enough to give anyone a headache. Gu Qingqiu, the second-generation pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion in Kunlun City. When this identity and this name were combined and passed to Li Huaqing's ears, Li Huaqing did not know how to react for a while. The most important thing was that Gu Qingqiu was going to turn herself in now. No one knew how this pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion turned against Gu Xingyun, but this was the result. Gu Qingqiu wanted to turn herself in. What was even more absurd was that Xianxia was completely controlled by this woman. Even now, he didn't blame her. Instead, he wanted to protect her. With this news came a lot of trouble surrounding Li Huaqing. Gu Qingqiu wanted to turn herself in, but she could not. Kill her? Xianxia could not do it. What he showed on the phone was that he wanted to protect that woman at all costs, even if she really turned herself in. But if she turned herself in, then her identity and relationship with Xianxia would appear in the sight of everyone in Zhongzhou State for the first time. What would be the consequences? Everything that Xianxia had done over the years would be studied with a magnifying glass, nitpicking bones from eggs. If they really wanted to find problems specifically, who dared to say that they had no problems at all? Xianxia, the successor of Li Huaqing, might become the target of all groups for the first time. Gu Qingqiu did not use Xianxia to do anything. Xianxia might be able to have a clear conscience, but it was difficult for him to be as immovable as a mountain. Under the focus of all groups, even if he could keep his position as a member of parliament, he would inevitably give up his position in the Ministry of Personnel. First of all, this would directly hurt the interests of the academics. The academics would also be violently turbulent. They might be dissatisfied with Gu Qingqiu, but all their emotions would be concentrated and vented on the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xingyun. But now Gu Xingyun was still the object of Li Huaqing's protection. Gu Qingqiu was obviously stimulated by something now. She did not think about anything else at all. The only thing she thought about was to stab Gu Xingyun with a knife. But after this knife, what should Li Huaqing do? In the face of the group's dissatisfaction with Gu Xingyun, should he suppress it? Could he suppress it? Once this matter was exposed, it would affect Xianxia's position and inevitably affect Xianxia's ranking in the parliament in the future. This kind of influence was fatal for the academics. The culprit was Gu Xingyun. When the matter broke out, did they not target the culprit, but protect him? Li Huaqing could completely imagine the huge chaos within the academics at that time. Internal troubles were brewing. If coupled with the targeting of all groups, Xianxia might fall directly at a certain point in time, not to mention going further in 5 years. Gu Qingqiu, Phoenix Pavilion, Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun, Xianxia, one by one, the identities were connected together. If this matter was used by someone with ulterior motives, if his means were clever enough, this might be a huge storm that could sweep the entire academics. And there were people with such means, such intelligence, such standpoint, such power. Of course there were. Now there was one in front of Li Huaqing. Of course, it was not Li Tianlan. It was Qin Weibai, who didn't look sharp at all and acted like a little woman at home. The reason why Li Huaqing was in a hurry to negotiate with Li Tianlan was that he wanted to immediately return to Yuzhou after solving the matter between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Kuangtu. He wanted to talk with Gu Qingqiu and Gu Xingyun to stabilize this matter. He originally thought that this might be the work of the Prince Group, or perhaps someone else. But he never thought that the matter of Gu Qingqiu turned out to be the work of Qin Weibai. This meant that she not only had the intelligence and means to set off a storm, but also meant that she had already mastered the cause of this matter. This was well prepared. She was unprepared. Under such circumstances, even Li Huaqing was not sure that he could suppress Qin Weibai. Do you know Gu Qingqiu? Li Huaqing asked straightforwardly. He is a very interesting person. But he is also a very pitiful person. Qin Weibai's voice was soft. It's not easy to find him. Even Xianxia doesn't know of his existence. You can think of it as a coincidence that I can find him. Gu Xingyun killed her whole family and trained her to be the pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion. Now she knows her life experience and knows some truth. Qin Weibai smiled and looked magnificent. I told her these things. I mentioned some things accidentally in a chat, so now she should only think about revenge and let Gu Xingyun die a horrible death. If this matter makes you embarrassed, then I'm sorry to cause you trouble. She was plain, without sincerity, and with a sense of ridicule. Li Huaqing smiled bitterly. For the first time, he experienced the sense of powerlessness that many people had experienced in front of this woman. Everyone knew that she was not simple, but no one knew from which angle this woman would make a move every time. He originally wanted to use a strong attitude to force Li Tianlan to take a step back, so as to fight for more benefits. But now Qin Weibai's simple words, a Gu Qingqiu, and a trump card directly put him in a completely passive position. Boss Qin is really brilliant. Li Huaqing whispered, I don't think I underestimated you, but in the end, I still underestimated you. I have a friendship with Gu Qingqiu. Qin Weibai said faintly, now she just wants revenge. She wants Gu Xingyun to lose everything, and she still has feelings for Minister Cheng. Li Huaqing was silent. He understood what Qin Weibai meant. Gu Qingqiu's goal was only to let Gu Xingyun pay the price. She wanted revenge. So now the only condition for her to give up surrendering was to let Gu Xingyun lose more things, and then use this as a bargaining chip, asking Qin Weibai to take this bargaining chip to persuade Gu Qingqiu. Since Qin Weibai had made a move, then what Gu Xingyun lost this time would naturally be transferred to Li Tianlan. And in such a bargaining chip, what Gu Xingyun lost was the most important. At present, at least the idea of letting Li Tianlan serve as a special advisor of Zhongzhou State and letting Gu Xingyun continue to be the war god of Zhongzhou State should be unrealistic. Li Huaqing could save Gu Xingyun. But the position of the war god of defense, they had fallen. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.